Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy channel. Might the Great Tribulation start in 2019? Or what about 2020? Or maybe 2021? Each year, various ones have different predictions about when they think the Great Tribulation will be, or when Jesus will return. Sometimes they call that the Rapture. Are they right? I'd like to start off by talking about one false prediction related to 2018 and 2019 and look at some of the logic in this. So I will read from one prediction here. The main reason I think the rapture will be in 2018 or early 2019 is it corresponds to the 70th anniversary of Israel, which started May 14, 2018, and obviously lasts 1 year. The logical reason for the 70th anniversary is that the true meaning of the seals already contains two 70-year periods in Israel's history, so the rapture would make a third, since the rapture is the sixth seal. Okay, this is a claim. It's totally false, of course. The rapture, which they define typically as Jesus' return, did not happen in 2018. It's not going to happen in 2019. I'll give you some reasons for that later. Now, for those of you who are Sabbath keepers, I'd like to read a prediction of the Great Tribulation for 2019 from something called the Sabbatical Code website. The rapture will commence before the Great Tribulation begins. The Great Tribulation, according to God's clock, is speculated to begin January 2019 equals October Tishri 2016, which is Sabbatical Code, blah, 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 blah. This will result in the Great Tribulation being from 2019 to 2022. In Matthew 24, it says about the flight, which is the rapture. Then it comes the word, the Great Tribulation, which pertains to this rapture time frame. This confirms what was said from above. January 2019 will be wintertime and would be seen as a Sabbath as it hits 7 o'clock in God's clock. Well, while faithful Christians have long kept the Sabbath, this God's clock nonsense reminds me of the flawed numerical stuff that the late Harold Camping did when he came up with his stuff. Jesus did not say to look at a clock in order to determine this. Well, speaking of clocks and times, here's another one. The scriptural timeline for major tribulation events, regardless of which year the rapture takes place, we provide the rabbinical date for each event, followed by the presumed Gregorian date. The Gregorian date assumes the tribulation will begin in 2019. If these things happen some other year, the Gregorian dates would need to be adjusted accordingly. Now, the Gregorian date is the typical date we use now, for instance, 2019. Well, Jesus' return, as well as things such as the Great Tribulation, have not based on the accuracy or the inaccuracy of the Gregorian calendar, despite the fact that people say this. I've got another piece of logic from somebody else regarding 2019. It says there were 2 decrees to return and build Jerusalem. First one was in 445 BC, according to this source. The second took place April 1, 1969. If we count 7 shemitah cycles, 49 years from the first shemitah cycle after 1969, when the second decree was given, the second coming of Christ must take place in the year 2022. The rapture must occur 3.5 years prior to the end of the tribulation, which would be spring 2019. Now, Jesus didn't say anything about calculating shemitah years, etc. I've blasted that in the past, and this is another person trying to put this out, and simply not possible. And Thomas Words has a YouTube video titled, The Great Tribulation 2019, the Third Temple End Times Bible Prophecy Warning, Repent. He said, the Great Tribulation, that must be in 2019. Then, this is the truth. No, it's not the truth. There's no temple that, by the way, that has to be built according to the Bible in terms of physical temple for sacrifices to take place, but this was somebody else. Now you might say, okay, well these are like Protestant sources, and maybe you're Catholic or Church of God. Here's one from a Fringe Catholic source. Possible date for World War III, June 13th through 15th, 2019. The second possible date is October 13th through 15th, 2019. And this supposedly is based upon things from Jacinta Marto of Fatima from 1917, one of the little kids who claimed to see the apparition of Fatima. But that's not it. As far as the Church of God goes, there's a fringe individual. I'm not going to mention his particular name, but pretty much he's predicted the Great Tribulation is going to begin pretty much every year for the last 10, 11 years. And I'll just read one statement. This was from November 25th, 2018. This person said or wrote, "At this time, all events are lining up for the 42-month Great Tribulation to begin the end of 2019, or if things go slowly, at the end of 2020. Well, this person and anybody else who claims that the Great Tribulation is going to start before 2022 are in error. Now, the Great Tribulation is going to come relatively soon. My view, based on looking at world events, things happen a certain way. I think it will be, well, within a decade or so. But many people don't look at what Jesus said, what the Bible says about this. They look to their own understandings. Now, over the last 10, 12 years, pretty much every year I've denounced various people with various logic as far as to when the Great Tribulation is supposed to begin. You might remember the blood moon controversies back in 2014 and 15, and I denounced that. Various ones have looked at shemitah years or jubilee years. Then there was the September Harbinger convergence stuff, and that wasn't it. Then there was the Jubilee of 2017. That was another thing. And also in 2017, they said a solar eclipse, that was going to be a sign. Or Planet Nibiru, that was going to be a sign. And in 2017 and 2018, have to do with 70 years after Israel. I denounced all those. Why? Because there's no such thing as blood moons? No, there's blood moons. Or because the nation of Israel didn't form in 1948? No, it formed then. But those weren't the signs that Jesus said to look for. You've got to look at what Jesus claimed or told his disciples. I shouldn't say claimed. I mean, Jesus asserted that we should be looking for. We would know. If you want to see the sequence, let's start with the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 24. I'm going to start reading in verse 3. This will be from the New King James Version of the Bible. Because Jesus' disciples were curious about this, as many of you are. Now as he, that's Jesus, sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming, the end of the age?" Now Jesus didn't respond with anything, something like, there's nothing you can do about it, don't worry about it, pay no attention to any of this kind of stuff. Instead, he gave a response. Verse 4, Matthew 24. And Jesus answered them, "Take heed that no one deceives you." Then he goes through various things that are going to happen. At the end of verse 7, he says, "The end is not yet." He talks about earthquakes and pestilences and sorrows. He calls these the beginning of sorrows in verse 8. Now, after the beginning of sorrows, let's see what we read starting in verse 9. Matthew 24, these are the words of Jesus, translated into English. "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will arise and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." Okay, there's the criteria. The gospel of the kingdom of God is going to be preached to all the world to God's satisfaction, then the end will come. Now, many people think the gospel's been preached to the world. Well, if it was, the end would have came. It has not come yet. So that's a sign that many people overlook. As a matter of fact, I haven't seen anybody making specific predictions about the Great Tribulation myself. I mean, perhaps somebody's done. So, okay, the gospel was preached this year, therefore it's coming. Haven't seen that. Maybe some have said it, but it's simply not true. When the gospel of the kingdom of God has been preached to God's satisfaction, then the end will come. The end being, for this context, the start of the Great Tribulation. Now let's go back to Jesus' words. This time we're going to pick it up in verse 15 from Matthew 24, right after where we left off. "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place," whoever reads, let him understand, "and let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who's on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath." So we see various things happening. See the abomination of desolation. We're going to get to the book of Daniel in a moment. You see, you're supposed to pray that flight not be in the winter of the Sabbath, which in my view supports the idea that Christians would be keeping the Sabbath at this time. Well, then what happens starting in verse 21? For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. So we see the Great Tribulation does not begin until Matthew 24:21. Again, this is after earthquakes and pestilences and false Christs, etc. Jesus said to look into some things that Daniel wrote. So let's go to Daniel. See anything about abomination and desolation here. We're going to go to Daniel chapter 9. We're going to pick this up in verse 26 of Daniel chapter 9. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood. And till the end of war, desolations are determined. So we're starting to see the term desolation here. Now let's go to verse 27. Then he, now this is a person called the prince in the prior verse, shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. Now this 1 week has been interpreted by prophecy watchers for at least 1800 years, 1900 years, for at least 1800 years, let's say. Could perhaps even longer, even back perhaps before the time of Jesus, to be a reference to 7 years. Now, if you go to Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, we also read something about this abomination and desolation. And from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Well, getting back to the 1 week being 7 years, middle of the week would be 3.5 years. If you break that in half. Well, it turns out that 1,290 days is also roughly 3.5 years. So they both seem to be referring to a common event in Daniel. Now this one who's called the prince in Daniel 9:26 and 27 is called the king of the north in Daniel chapter 11. Now notice something else about abominations and desolations in this individual in Daniel chapter 11 verse 31. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Now this him is the king of the north. And notice that the Great Tribulation takes place after this event. Now for this to happen, we'll have to see some type of a deal in the Middle East, probably some kind of a peace deal, that's going to be confirmed by a prince from Europe. This has not yet happened. Now this prince will later become a major power in Europe. Europe is going to have a reorganization. We haven't seen it yet. They're not ready. They're not ready, therefore it's another reason why the Great Tribulation is not going to start in 2019 or 2020. As far as the reorganization goes, in Revelation chapter 17 and verse 12, we read, "The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who've received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast." It's a type of reorganization. This particular beast is this king of the north individual that we just read about in Daniel chapter 11, and who was called a prince in Daniel chapter 9. This peace deal, has not happened yet. Since it hasn't happened yet, the 3.5-year clock hasn't started. So if you add 3.5 years to the time I'm doing this in late 2018, you'll find out that gets you into sometime into 2021. But because of other things that have not happened yet, I don't think, it actually takes you to 2022. And I don't believe that the Great Tribulation can start before 2023. Now, you say, okay, well, the Great Tribulation is going to start for a while. Can we just ignore what's going on? We don't need to pay attention or anything like that. Well, if you do that, you're not heeding what Jesus said. Let's go to the book of Mark. Mark chapter 13, starting in verse 32. Jesus said, But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Now, does that mean we could never know? No, Jesus told us. You see, the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, it's time to flee. Okay? So it's not that we'd never know. And we also have, in the book of Daniel, the deal of Daniel 9, 26 and 27. And when that deal has been confirmed, we've got a pretty good idea in terms of what year it's going to be. Anyway, so what are we supposed to do? Well, Jesus said, verse 33 of Mark 13, "Take heed, watch and pray, for you don't know when the time is. It's like a man going to far country. He left his house and gave his authority to his servants, and to each his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to watch. Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, in the evening, at midnight, at the crowing of the rooster, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say to you all, watch." Now, what was Jesus talking about watching? Well, he was talking about watching the events that he'd listed in, for example, Matthew 24, Mark 13, book of Daniel, as well as Luke 21. Let's go to Luke 21 for a moment. See something else Jesus said. Heaven and earth, on this starting verse 33. So let's go back to this. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. That particular prophecy of Jesus has happened. His words have not passed away. Let's continue. "But take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the cares of this life, and that day come upon you unexpectedly. For it will come as a snare on those who dwell on all those who dwell on the face of the whole earth. Watch therefore and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man." You need to get your spiritual life in order. You need to get your priorities straight. You need to be supporting the work of Matthew 24:14. I know a lot of people think it's more important for them to know the date or something, that God will take care of them, and that God understands why they don't support the work of getting Matthew 24:14 done. God certainly understands, but he understands that people have different priorities. And I won't go into all this, but at the time of the end, according to Jesus, most Christians are going to be Laodicean Christians and will not know what's going to happen until it's too late. I read a couple of predictions about the rapture, or the return of Jesus, as I would be more correctly put it, to occur. Well, that doesn't happen until after the Great Tribulation. Matthew 24, verse 29 says, this is Jesus' words, "Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." You can also read about that in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 16 to 17. So what should you do? Well, you need to get your spiritual life in order. To be worthy to escape all these things, you're supposed to watch and pray. You should be worthy to escape. So live as a true Christian would. Get your spiritual life in order. Support the work of getting Matthew 24:14 fulfilled. The Great Tribulation is coming, and it's coming relatively soon. But because we have not seen events that Jesus referred to, particularly in the book of Daniel, and some other events Jesus referred to, the Great Tribulation cannot start in 2019, 2020, 2021, and as far as I'm concerned, 2022. Doesn't mean the Great Tribulation is not going to come soon, because it actually is. It is going to come relatively soon. Get your spiritual life in order. Watch and pray that you be kind of worthy to escape all the things that would come to pass. As Jesus said, watch. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy channel.